Hey guys, it's Trevor here from Me, Myself, and Die. Thanks for joining me here today. I have the immense pleasure of hosting an interview with one of my favorite YouTubers, Dave Thaumavore, who I met over at Gen Con. Say hello, Dave. Welcome to Me, Myself, and Die.
Howdy.
Good to
You're
see
in
you, man. Thanks for
you're
coming
in
on.
you're in Texas, so I say howdy, and you should understand that.
Oh, I do now, man.
Yeah.
I do now.
How
yeah,
many
I'm
how many
fair.
flavors how many flavors of Texan can you do voice wise?
Well, I've only been here 2 years, so I'm still working
Yeah.
out the
Yeah. All right.
details.
All right.
I mean, it's a big state. There's going to
It
be like
is.
as many dialects as there
Oh
are in
yeah.
England, probably.
Yeah. But there is a distinct Texan compared to say like Mississippian, Louisiana, that
Oh
sort of thing.
yeah, for sure.
So,
For sure, for sure. A
but
friend
that's
of mine
cool.
who lives here, he's from Louisiana, and he still has his very distinct kind of semi-Cajun accent
Yeah,
sometime, you know?
it's distinct for sure. But yeah, thanks for having me, man. Yeah.
So, first of all, it was great to meet you at Gen Con. That was a surprise. It was a surprise meeting anybody at Gen Con. I didn't think that I didn't think I would run into anybody, and I didn't think anybody would know who I was. So it was so weird, man, because like when I did the interview with Dan, the Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon
Uh-huh.
Craft,
Yeah.
which I'd set up because I'm a patron of his.
Hmm.
So I said, "Hey, I'd love to interview you," and so we did that at like 8:15 in the morning on the Thursday or Friday, whatever it was, and it was great. And then he texted me later saying, "Hey, we're gonna go out for dinner with Kelsey of Shadow Dark. Do you want to come?" And I'm like, I don't. I mean, no one's gonna know me. Yeah. And so I say, you know what? You're at Gen Con. You gotta go. You gotta do this thing. So I go. I'm thinking, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody knows who I am. 10 minutes later, I leave. Right. I walk
It's
into
cool.
this restaurant, and Kelsey looks at me and she goes, "Oh my God, you're here!" And I'm like, "What?" She comes up and gives me a hug. She's like, "I'm your biggest fan." I was like, "You know who I am." It was really weird,
That's a
but
nice
it was cool.
feeling.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, totally. And then when I met you the next night, it was the same thing. It was there was a whole bunch of us out at dinner at that pub, and I
Hmm.
looked. We had two tables, right? And I looked
Hmm.
across at the second table, and I'm like, "Is that Thalmavore?" And there, of course, there you are.
Yeah, that was the highlight of the whole experience for me is seeing fellow YouTubers. But you know what was interesting was some of those guys had like huge subscriber counts, but they were shorts guys. And so,
Right.
they have these massive followings. I don't know how loyal those followings are, but the subscriber counts are just in the hundreds of thousands. And I'd never heard of them and they never heard of me. It almost seems like people who do RPG shorts are in a different, magisterium than those of us who toil with the long form videos.
Those of us who work for a living.
Yeah.
So I just noticed today, actually, I don't really look at the short stuff. It doesn't really interest me, but your feed came up and you do a bunch of 1,000 Year Vampire.
I did like three because I was moving at the time and I didn't have time to do like a full video. So I just cranked out a few of those just to see like, what it's like to make videos for that format. And it's okay. I mean, it was satisfying. I feel like I could do more of those, but I guess I just prefer to do reviews.
And your reviews are great. Like they're super in depth. Your production quality is great on your reviews. That's what I noticed early when I discovered you a couple of years back. I was like, oh, this guy he takes the time to actually make this a really interesting watch, which I really appreciated.
Well,
How
thanks.
long? Yeah, for sure. How long have you been on the YouTubes?
I think that I just hit the 5 year mark.
That's great.
Yeah, and the first year was very. I don't think I mean, I started the channel 5 years ago, but I don't think I really started producing until like a year later. So 4 years of proper content creation.
Well, that's great. So, how did you get involved? Like, what brought you into the whole thing?
Um, I was playing 5e. I'd taken a long, decades long hiatus from RPGs. Played a lot of video games, but then I got tried to get into 5e and was just very dissatisfied with it. Found Index Card RPG and was playing with the creator and some of his cohorts for a while, and decided I wanted to promote some of his stuff, but through reviews. And then, so my first review is like a review of an ICRPG supplement. And then it just branched out from there. I figured I want to review other stuff too. So, I mean, I immediately branched out and kind of filled a niche, I guess. I don't know. There are other people making reviews. Ben Milton of Questing Beast makes reviews of non-D&D RPGs, but he's very focused on OSR. And I'm just pretty much everything else. You know, I just non-D&D, not OSR, just everything else. So
that is exactly why I felt this immediate kinship with your channel, because I was like, this is exactly what I'm trying to promote. I'm trying to promote the universe of games out there that have nothing to do with rolling a d20 against armor class and doing hit points and damage, which is fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
That's where it all started. It's fine. But there's so much more.
That's the mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
A bit of an uphill battle, but the reward is people saying, thanks for showing me this new game. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Exactly. I had a bunch of people when I was about to go into my third season of the main show on the channel, say, oh, you know what you should really do? You should really use 5e because it's going to get you like 100,000 extra views right away. And I thought, I just can't do it. I just can't do it for all kinds of reasons. I gave up D&D in like 1984. You know what I mean? And I never really looked back. I kind of dabbled in 3.5 when it came out, and I was like, I don't like this either. And then and then 5e came out. I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I ran the Fandelver thing, and I was like, wow, it's still got all the stuff that bugs the hell out of me. Yeah. So no. And I get why people like it, but what really bugs me, and I'm sure you found this too, is this automatic assumption that D&D is the only game there. And that you get these, I hear this a million times from GMs everywhere about how, well, I'd really love to run, Warhammer or whatever, but my players, they don't want to play anything except, they don't want to learn a new rule set. And I think, okay, if you're like 45 years old and you got kids and a job and stuff, and you've been playing D&D for 20 years, then it's time to learn something new.
Yeah.
There's no excuses.
I mean, I suspect that there are a lot of people in the RPG hobby who have just settled on one rule set. There are people who've been playing nothing but RuneQuest for 30 years and people who've played 20 straight years or however long it's been out of Pathfinder and things like that. People just get entrenched, but that's also a shame. Hopefully they can branch out too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we're the outliers, the people who are always looking at the new, or not even the new, just the different, right?
Yeah.
I know guys that have been playing a Palladium game sort of based on this Viking world called Aethgard for 30 years.
Yeah.
30 years they've been playing this. And it's exactly what you say it is. This is the game they play. And they've sort of dabbled a little bit outside, but they always come back to it. So I suspect that is the norm. I suspect that most people just have the group with the game, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
Which, again, it's fine. But my experience has always been, I get excited about new mechanics. I get excited about different ways to do the same shit over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And maybe that makes me a crazy person. I don't know, but...
I was having this conversation with Ben at Gen Con about where the majority of the RPG corpus is, like where most of these RPG people are. And if you were to judge that, if you were to assess that by YouTube subscriber numbers, the biggest channels are ones that are spectators, where you're a spectator, like Critical Role, Dimension 20, that sort of thing. Or D&D build channels where the person describes the intricate character builds for literally just Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And in both cases, we surmised that those people aren't playing, especially the spectators, but even the build audience, they're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. They're just there on the bleachers, which...
Right.
If most of this hobby is people just imagining that they could play or just watching other people play, that's an interesting insight. And I don't really know how to process that. I'm still trying to figure out what that means or what the implications are.
I think you're right. I'd said for years, I mean, long before the internet, long before that became a thing, I remember I'd be running games and I'd have friends that were sort of interested and they would say, well, I'd love to come and watch. And I would say, no. And they say, why not? I'd say, because it's not a spectator sport. You don't want to watch it. I can think of nothing more boring than watching somebody else play a game. You want to participate. And then that's a whole different animal. And fast forward 20 years, now watching people play games is all the rage. I don't get it, dude. I don't get it. Even my show. And I cut my show to be like super, super edity just to make sure it's pacey and pow, 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 30 minutes, pow, get in, get out, tell the story, wow, wow. But the idea of like, showing the entirety of a game session with all of the ums and ahs and the thinking and the rolling stuff that doesn't matter. I'm like, who wants to watch this? And yet there's Twitch with hundreds of thousands of people watching this stuff all the time. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I remember running. When I was playing 5e, I was at a local game shop, and it was in this private room that had a glass wall and glass door. Guy pops in and he's like, can I play with you guys? We were just getting started. And I was like, no, we got a full table. And he's like, you mind if I sit here and watch? And I said, I guess. And he sat there on a stool for 4 hours quietly and chuckled when we had jokes and stuff. He was like there, but he never said a word. He was very polite and very conscientious. And he just sat there. And then at the end of this long session, he thanked me and left. And like, that was the moment I should have realized that was the future. That guy was the future of the hobby. If you want to consider the majority of the hobby, it's odd, but I don't know.
It is odd. You telling this story reminds me of a friend of mine, a very, very close friend of mine who moved away when we were still in high school. And, we've kept in contact all these years. But when he was living with us back in Edmonton, he played all the time with us, and he loved the game. He loved it, loved it, loved it. And he moved away, and life happened, and he didn't get a chance to play. And now his only connection with the game, as much as we try and get him, like, we've got Roll20 now, we can do this remotely. We can have this experience. It's not the same experience, but it's better than nothing. His only connection with the game is watching other people play as a sort of like nostalgia exercise. Like, I remember what that was like. So I guess I can kind of understand that. People who really want to play, but they can't for various reasons. This is as good as it gets, I guess. Or this is as good as they can get, I guess. But again, with the age of the internet and remote gaming, which, let's face it, this is a huge thing now. I would probably say this is what most people engage in now, is the online, the sort of Foundry, Roll20 kind of stuff. In this age, there's almost no excuse for not being able to find some kind of group to actually play, right?
So I think that the spectators are getting something different out of it. They're not getting the first person play experience because they're not playing, but they're getting a community experience, and they're getting a parasocial relationship. If you've ever said anything negative about Critical Role online, you'll know what I'm talking about. You get attacked because they feel a very strong connection. It's not a real connection, it's parasocial, but it's something they feel very strongly to those actors. And then they also feel a community amongst each other, and that community can be pretty large. And those are totally different feelings or joys than you would get from playing an RPG with a few friends. So they're going in it for different things, I think, and they're getting different things out of it than the traditional.
That's a really good point. And it also kind of helps explain a phenomenon that I've never understood either, because I'm an old curmudgeon. But I've never understood the idea of people who engage in chat on a live show like that, especially when there's like 50,000 people and that chat one is going brrr, like, who's reading this? Who feels like you're part of something when you write something and it's already 100, entries up the window? I don't understand it, but maybe that's part of it, the feel that they're connected somehow.
It's the same. Maybe it's the same thing as like going to a concert, and when there's 50,000 people and you're cheering and clapping, it's not like you're being heard, but you're a part of it. Okay. That's my best guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. I never thought of it like that. Weird. Okay. Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But hey, I do have to, in their defense, I do have to say it is it can be hard to play and run these games. I mean, scheduling is a pain,
Sure.
technical problems, getting people to read. I mean, not to sound condescending, but a lot of people just don't want to read,
Yeah.
and they don't have the time, they don't have the inclination. Mostly these days, they don't have the attention span because we're being attacked from all sides for our
Yes.
attention. It's
Yes.
this commodity that companies and society is just scraping at us for. And so we don't read 400-page books. Maybe the GM does, but you can't get the players to, you can't get the players to buy in. And there are some challenges to playing RPGs. In fact, that's probably why it's the smallest. I mean, if you compare RPGs to board games and video games, video games are the biggest market, the biggest industry, because you don't have to read anything. You just play it. It provides the value landscape for you. You pick up the controller. Let me show you something here. Hold on. There's a prop. You pick up this controller and you don't have to read a damn thing. You have your value landscape here. You have your points, you have your character, whatever it is, and you start pushing buttons. And these days, you don't even really have a manual. You might have an interactive tutorial or something. It's the easiest way to game. And then next step down, and smaller in industry, but much bigger than RPGs, is board games, where again, you have a very tight, defined value landscape. You know what is worth what in the world of the board game, and you have to read a little bit. You do have to think, but it doesn't hold a candle to your average RPG. RPGs being your smallest, most demanding type of game, smallest in terms of the industry. So it can be tough. It's tough to play RPGs, relatively.
Yeah, you're right. I have a lot of conflicting feelings on that. I mean, I agree with everything you said, but I have a lot of conflicting feelings about the I don't know what to call it, the internetification of RPGs in a way, because I'm playing this Pathfinder 2e game on Foundry right now. It's my first time playing Pathfinder. It's my last time playing Pathfinder, and it's my first. It's my first time playing Foundry. I instigated this because I know these guys and they're big into Pathfinder, they're big into Foundry, and I said, okay, I want to run a campaign. I want to be part of this sort of big dungeon crawl we're doing, and it's exactly what that is. It's dungeon crawl. It's got all the stuff that's associated with that. But I noticed immediately that on Foundry, that I'm not playing a role-playing game. First of all, I'm not playing a character. I'm playing a series of numbers. I'm playing a build. That's red flag number one. I think that's more indicative of Pathfinder than it is of the Foundry interface.
Okay.
But the other thing is that the Foundry interface, it's almost as though it's trying to create a video game experience, but without the immediacy and intuitiveness of a video game, like you just talked about, right? With the controls are easy to figure out and stuff like that. So it feels like this weird hybrid between wannabe video game and wannabe RPG, and it sort of is neither of those things. Now, I'm not to say I'm not having fun with the experience, and I'm glad I'm having the experience, but I would never, never, never call that a role-playing experience, because it's not. It's a weird interface that is its own thing. And so when people talk about, oh, well, I'm going to fire up Foundry and have and run a game, part of my brain always goes, well, it's not really a game, though, is it? I mean, it's a type of role-playing game. It's a type. But I don't want to sound like I'm condescending. I don't want to sound like I'm one true way or anything like that. But I can't help it. That's my brain goes there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I've played Foundry. I've played in Foundry with a few games. One that comes to mind is Twilight 2000. There's a guy who does all of the Foundry modules for Free League, and he did Twilight 2000. Excellent module, has everything, but again, like you said, it's like operating some sort of giant switchboard where you're just a servant to the rules. Like when you like in Twilight 2000, the second edition or whatever edition the Free League came out with, fourth, yeah, you have to manage your ammo. And so in Foundry, it's convenient. You drag ammo onto your gun or whatever. And like when you click on your gun to attack, your ammo depletes, and then you drag clips back onto your gun and stuff like that. But it's so fiddly. it all works, but it's just like tiddlywinks, man. And so I think that actually appeals to a certain cross segment of the hobby. Obviously Pathfinder's huge. People like all those fiddly bits. And if you have a little or giant multi-tabbed interface to manage those fiddly bits, that's great for them. But certainly I don't think that has mass appeal. I mean, I hope the best for Foundry in general, but I think that
Yeah.
that VTT caters to a very small population of people who really sort of fetishize that granularity.
One of the things that I had said to the player group with this Pathfinder game is, they said that they tried to sell the features like, oh, it's great. You don't have to do any of the calculations. You just hit a button. And to me, I go, well, then I'm not playing the game. I'm not learning the game. A computer is playing the game for me. Again, maybe I'm too old school, but for me, learning a game means sitting down with the damn book and learning the mechanics and learning the rules and really understanding what it means when I roll a set of dice and have to apply modifiers to a target number and understanding what that actually means. When you remove that, when you just say, oh, it's okay, just hit this button, you're not really playing that game anymore. You're playing sort of this video gamey kind of version of it. And maybe people don't care, maybe like I said, maybe I'm just an old man, yelling at the clouds or whatever, but it's just odd. It's odd to me. The whole thing.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel. I think it's hard to judge that because another feature of RPGs is that it's a type of game that conforms to the shape of its container. And in this case, the container is its players and its GM. So
absolutely.
And I'm sure that your GM and your players in this Pathfinder game are awesome, but you could possibly have a completely different experience with Pathfinder in Foundry if you played with a different set of people, better or worse. Sure. I don't know. Maybe another GM would see, because what the auto calculations are doing is it's saving you time. But what do you do with that saved time? And what if you had a GM who used that extra time to emphasize more role play, more story, And what if that turns out is what you were missing the whole time? Who knows? But it's just always different with each table, even if it's the same game with the same VTT. So it's really hard to draw any conclusions there.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Every GM is going to take. You can take any game and put it with any GM, and it's going to be a vastly different experience based on the quirks of the GM, the focuses of the GM that they choose to. It's so funny. Do you know the game Burning Wheel by Luke Crane?
Yeah.
So one of the most hilarious things I ever saw. I did a Sage's Library on Burning Wheel where I talk a lot about how I've thrown it across the room multiple times in frustration. It's a game I really want to love, but sometimes I just hate it so much. Mm-hmm. But it's got all of these fiddly bits that are options. Hey, it's just options. But really, if you want to engage with all that stuff, you got to learn those options. But what's hilarious to me is when you watch some of the online examples of play that Luke Crane himself is when he's running a game. He himself says, ignore all those rules. Just roll a couple of D6. And I'm like, so you're putting all this effort into these rules and you, the designer, are just saying, don't worry about that. Let's just get on with it. Whereas I've run Burning Wheel myself and I've been slavishly adherent to those rules because I want to understand the designer's intent. And in this case, the designer himself doesn't seem to care. I just think it was an hilarious irony.
I mean, it's possible. It's possible that Luke had more fun writing it than he did ever playing it. I mean, that happens, and that's a kind of a problem with RPG books. Sometimes is that you can tell that the writer will sometimes just get carried away, and they don't ever want to let go of what they've created. Are you familiar with the phrase "kill your darlings"?
Oh yes.
They don't kill their darlings, and they just end up with books that have a lot of excess and a lot of bloat. Which and if you can get away with that and make a bestseller, then that's great. But then people like you will suffer trying to keep up with all the bloat. So.
Yeah, I have sort of a rule of thumb before I house rule a game, which I inevitably do. I think we all inevitably house rule. But before I do that, and I've had this for about the past 15 years or so, that I always try to play it rules as written first, because I am trying to understand what the designer's intention was. And it's very easy to assume something about a design intention and remove it and have the whole fabric of it fall apart. A perfect example is actually when I ran Phandelver for 5e. I immediately looked at 5e. I said, you know what? There's no adventure in exploration. There's no difficulty in actually going from place to place, which for me is some of the most exciting stuff. It's not the dungeon. It's, literally getting there is half the fun. But in 5e, the rule set, there's very little in terms of support for wilderness exploration and stuff. So I said, you know what? I'm going to throw in some house rules here about, making camp and, making sure you have enough rations and yada, yada, yada. Well, as it turns out, when you try and implement that on bog standard 5e without understanding the totality of 5e, it's ridiculous. It falls apart very quickly, and you realize, oh, this game clearly does not care about that. This is not a priority for 5e.
Right.
And when you try and bolt that on, it can be very awkward and clumsy. And of course, it was awkward and clumsy. That's not what made me not like the 5e experience. It was everything else. But yeah, it's easy to look at a game with rules bloat and go, oh, I'm just going to hack this away without understanding, well, maybe there is a reason for this here. But of course, as you well know, the trend over the past many years has been rules light, rules light, rules light. They want to get leaner, leaner, leaner. And that's advantageous. But do you find, as I do, that sometimes a game can be so rules light as to not really be worth having a rule set at all? Like there's many games that have been released now where it's so rules light. I think, well, you're basically just passing the story stick at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be brutally honest here. There are so many games coming out right now, probably one a week, maybe 10 a week. I mean, at this point, and most of them are just not that good because they don't have, and I mean most of them, like 99% of them, because it's easy to publish now. You just write it out, throw some art in, publish it. There's no screening or anything. And most of these games don't have this overarching sort of vision for what the player is supposed to do. There are things you can do, but what is the overall soul or spirit of the game? And one example that comes to mind that I played recently was Wander Home, which is very rules light. I mean, it's one of the lightest games imaginable in terms of its rules. But when I played it, and I played it with people who they bought into the concept, they read the rules or the book and the lists and everything that it comes with, and we played it as intended. And even though it was rules light, we created this incredible story and we fulfilled what the creator was trying to do. So if the game has a soul in it, if it has the direction, the directive for players on what kind of story is to be told, I think that rules light can work. It can work just fine. I know that you personally, you're into more like simulationist rules heavy stuff. So maybe rules light is just always going to rub you the wrong way.
Well, the irony there is, for my normal like in-person groups, I tend to gravitate towards shall we call it a more robust rule set, you might say. But on the channel, when I'm doing a season of the show, rules complexity just gets in the way of doing what I'm trying to do, which is tell the story of these characters. As much as I hate that word storyteller, I've been on record many times about saying I don't like that term. But I've also said that on my channel in the main shows, it's a show. It's a show, and it has to have a beginning, middle, and end. It has to have rising action. It has to have motivated characters. It has to have all the stuff that you'd have in any scripted production, even though it's not scripted. So for me, I look at a rules light situation, a rule set, and think this would be much better to facilitate what I'm trying to do on the channel, because what I'm trying to do on the channel, on the show, is get to the heart of the action. And my love of rules complexity actually gets in the way of that. I found that even in season 3 of my show, where I used a very old and obscure rule set called Dominion rules, which, I love the simulation of it, but it just got super clunky as I'm trying to race to the end. And I found myself many times just going, I'm just going to, if I roll high, I succeed.
Yeah.
So I basically pulled a Luke Crane. I just ignored all the rules,
I'm surprised that you sort of avoid the term, or you dislike the term storyteller. What's behind that?
So, this is a can of worms. So,
because you seem to me a consummate storyteller. I mean, that's what these solo sessions are all about, right? Or am I missing the point of it? I mean, they're about showcasing rules as well, but
yeah. Thank you for that. That is a great compliment. You are correct. I am, in fact, telling a story, but here's where the breakdown happens for me. As a games master, I believe, at least for me, I'm not going to cite the one true way or anything, but I know for me that the term storyteller implies, and has implied over the years, that you have a pre-scripted outcome for your players. And I ran that way for a long, long time. Here's the module. Here's what happens. Here's what happens when the players do this, and here's the predetermined outcome, and isn't it epic and awesome? Now, those were very fun most of the time. Sometimes they were really, really railroady and awful, but they had the potential to be really fun. But I got bored of them as a GM because I realized at one point, I don't want to know the ending. I don't want to know what happens. I want to experience the revelations with my players as they go. So I'll have like an outline. I'll have a detailed world, detailed NPCs, detailed kind of sandboxy style, right? Like where I know who all the NPCs are. I know what they want. I know what they're going to do unless they're interfered with, which is of course the job of the players. So to me, the term storyteller has this implication of the players must follow this road. And I'm very against that because I feel that really limits the player's agency.
Yeah.
Because the only control you have as a player in an RPG is, of course, what you do with your character, barring some of these new school games where everybody sort of shares the GMing responsibilities. But that's a separate issue. So storytelling, in terms of its structure, like I said, beginning, middle, and end, sort of a 3-act structure, rising action, all that kind of stuff, that is implicit in the show that I do, but I wouldn't say that it's implicit in the games that I run necessarily.
Okay, well,
because
you're preaching to the
animals.
choir. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I thought you just meant you generally or your channel. Yeah, so on your channel, clearly storyteller, playing RPGs. I like to refer to it as collective storytelling. Everybody has a hand in it. But yeah, I mean, nobody wants the GM to just sit there and read their novel. That's not fun.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all been at those tables,
Yes.
And it's awful. It's awful,
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
And so to me, it's just, words matter. Language means something. So when I see all of these, especially younger GMs talking about, oh, well, I'm going to tell my story, that term, that can worm its way into a GM's brain. And then they're making these mistakes where they're literally just telling their story. And at that point, you want to say, dude, go write the novel because you're not doing your players any favors here. No,
I agree. The best gaming sessions I've had are where the GM understands that you're supposed to lift up the players, cheer on their characters' choices and their words, be a fan of their actions. It's their story, really. If you want to be the best kind of GM, you really get out of the way, but
exactly.
Everyone has their style, I guess.
Yeah. And the opposite style to that, of course, is the killer GM, is the antagonistic GM. This is also something I'm very much against. I don't like games and rule sets that, and I haven't talked about this on the channel before, but I will eventually when I talk about games like Fate and things like this, where there is a meta currency that passes back and forth between player and GM, almost creating an adversarial relationship. Like Fate does this all the time. I don't know how familiar you are with Fate, but the idea of the compel. So the character has I forget what they call it, an aspect, right? I don't know, crazy risk taker, let's say. So in a situation, the GM might say, okay, well, you're at the end of, I don't know, you're at the edge of a cliff. and you want to do some crazy stunt. So I'm going to compel you to engage with your crazy risk taker thing. So I'm going to offer you a fate point. And if you put your character at risk because of your chosen trait, I'm going to give you this little reward. Okay, all fine and good. But at least in the earlier iterations of Fate, maybe they changed this. If the player said, no, I don't want to put my character at risk right now, then the player has to pay the GM a fate point. And I'm like, this is awful. This is just like, this creates an adversarial us against them relationship, which is the antithesis of what a GM should be doing.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of the traditional dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons nostalgia lore. I mean, you see it in Stranger Things a little bit. You see it in these depictions where the dungeon master is this whole entity, and there's literally a wall, a DM screen, a GM screen that separates them from the players. And, it is adversarial. And, like when you're fighting the monsters, you're fighting against the DM's players. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but that was at least one style of play that was pretty predominant for a while, I think.
Oh yeah, I remember it in the days of playing AD&D back in the early 80s. That's the way it was, and it never even made it didn't even make any sense to me then, and I was very young. But I was like, well, wait a minute, the GM is essentially God. The GM can just have anything happen. So how can we possibly compete with that? We can't. True.
Well, I mean, you're supposed to fall back on the rules and all this, but it's very biased.
It's totally biased. And then there's the, it wasn't called this at the time, but Rule 0, right? Which is the GM makes up the rules. Well, that's the case. Then how can you have an adversarial relationship against God?
Yeah.
You can't, Anyway, whatever. It was fun. They were fun games.
Yeah, sure. Just remember the fun parts.
Exactly. So speaking of fun, are you playing any games right now yourself?
Nothing regular. I mean, I played in a game of Savage Worlds the other day, but generally, I'm actually finding it hard to find time to play right now. And I do get a lot of flack from people online who think that I should be playing every game that I review. That's never going to happen because it'd have to be a full-time job with like a team of people for me to manage to play all these games. But I do try to play as much as I can. But I was thinking just the other day that what I really need is a group of people who I can play a new game with frequently, like change the games very frequently, because I'm cycling through games for review. But I don't want to play the whole game experience. Like, how wine tasters, when they're all sitting on a panel, they will drink the wine and then spit it out so that they don't get trashed. They're trying to drink a bunch of different wines, and then they drink a little water to cleanse their palate. That's kind of where I want to be at right now with these RPGs. I want people who understand that we're trying to play the game to analyze different aspects of the rules and of the setting and of the mechanics and stuff, and skip all the boring parts. Like, we don't need the meat at the tavern. We don't need the dialogue, maybe a little dialogue, but only insofar as it pertains to the rules of the game, and probably get through 6 or 8 hours of game time in 2 hours, because we're attacking it from a different angle. We're not really trying to enjoy it as consumers, but as designers and critics of the game. So if I can find a group of people who have that mindset, that would be amazing, because then I could really start attacking these games from not just from reading it and thinking about it, but from playing it analytically. So that's my hope, at least.
I kind of had that for a while, in a way, with my guys back home, because when I moved away, I started to encounter all these different games, and I would come home every 6 months and be like, guess what? I got this game, let's play it. And they're like, okay. So we'd play like 2 sessions. I'd come home for 4 days. We'd play 2 sessions, and then I'd leave. And then I'd come back 6 months and guess what? I got this new game. And they're like, really? But I'm like, no. Come on. You guys are so good at understanding rules. Let's exactly what you just said. Let's look at this. Let's tear it apart. So I wound up subjecting these guys to all of these different games. So they were sort of unwilling participants in my little experiment, like what you're talking about. But they were so great because they were so they are so analytically competent that they internalize rule systems very quickly, so we can get past all of the boring parts and get right into the heart of what makes this system work.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to have that. But if you're looking to do that again, sign me up, dude. I'll be part of that for sure. That'd be great.
Awesome. Man, that'd be like a dream come true. I got a stack of books. I don't want to turn the camera, but I'll show you. I've got a lot of backlog to go through. I have about 29 PDFs, 29 digital games that I want to review at some point. And then I picked up these games. Oh, yeah. I'm just getting into this. I've got this bad boy that I really want to look at. I mean, this is 4th printing, so it's been around a while. Also got this one. This is the fantasy one. And,
I'm running that right now for my guys. I'm running a funnel for them right now.
That's it, man. This is a match made in heaven. I need you, man.
Well, I'm yours.
You have my sword.
Well, yeah. And my microphone. Well, yeah, okay. So tell the people at home how they can find you on the internet, Dave.
Yeah, I am not on social media. I'm just on the YouTube.
Good for you.
And my Patreon and my newsletter. That's it, the Triumvirate. And you can find those links through my YouTube channel, which is Dave Thaumavore.
Cool. I will put a link in the description below for all of my viewers, because if you haven't subscribed to Dave's channel, you totally should. He does fantastic, really awesome in-depth reviews, and with great production quality, like a lot of care, which I obviously appreciate, being a fellow videophile who wants to make sure that my videos are quality work. So I appreciate your work, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your dedication to production as well. I mean, you're pretty next level there.
Well, I have a lot of spare time on my hands. Well, thanks so much for joining me, man. It was great fun talking to you and really illuminating. And we'll talk to you soon. Well, let's get this one-shot thing going and see what happens.
Yes, that's awesome, man.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Me, Myself, and I.